The morning sun stretched across the valley like golden honey, and Thomas Hartwell adjusted his worn leather gloves as he stepped out onto the porch of his ranch house. He had lived here for 37 years now, and every sunrise still filled him with the same quiet gratitude he had felt as a young man when he first saw this land. The horses were restless in the corral, and he could hear them nickering softly to each other in that way they did when something was different in their world. Thomas was a man who noticed such things. At 62, he had learned to read the subtle signs that most folks missed. The way the cattle bunched together when a storm was coming, how his old dog Buster would pace the fence line when strangers approached, and today there was definitely something different. He walked slowly toward the eastern pasture where his prize mare Daisy had been grazing. The morning air carried the scent of sage and the faint sweetness of wildflowers that grew along the creek bed. It was the kind of morning that made a man grateful for simple things: a good horse, a sturdy roof, and the peace that came from living close to the land. As he rounded the bend near the old stone wall his grandfather had built decades ago, Thomas stopped, short. There on the ground, wrapped in what looked like an old army blanket, lay a young woman. She was curled up small against the morning chill, and even from a distance he could see she was hurt. Thomas had seen enough in his years to know when someone was running from trouble. The way she had positioned herself behind the wall, hidden but not completely concealed, it spoke of someone who needed help but was afraid to ask for it. He approached slowly, the way he would with a wounded animal. His boots made soft sounds on the dusty ground, and he could see her tense even though she appeared to be unconscious. "Miss," he called out gently when he was still a good 10 feet away. "Miss, can you hear me?" The young woman stirred and opened her eyes. They were the color of summer sky, but clouded with pain and something that looked like fear. When she saw him, she tried to push herself up against the stone wall. "Please," she whispered, and her voice was barely audible. "Please don't touch me." Thomas stopped where he was and slowly removed his hat. It was something his mother had taught him long ago. Always remove your hat when speaking to a lady. Always move slowly when someone is frightened. "I won't touch you, miss," he said in the same voice he used to calm spooked horses. "I just want to help if I can." She looked up at him with those blue eyes, and he could see she was trying to decide whether to trust him. Her face was pale and drawn, and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and worry. The blanket she clutched around herself was threadbare and patched, but it was clean, which told him she took care of what little she had. "Are you hurt?" Thomas asked. He kept his voice soft and even, the kind of tone that said he had all the time in the world. She nodded slowly and winced as if even that small movement caused her pain. "I think," she started, then stopped and swallowed hard. "I think my shoulder might be broken." Thomas felt his heart clench with sympathy. He had raised 3 daughters of his own, and though they were grown now with families of their own, he still felt that protective instinct whenever he saw someone young and vulnerable. "My name is Thomas Hartwell," he said. "This is my ranch and you're safe here." He paused to let that sink in. "I'm going to step back now and give you some space, but I'd like to help you get to the house where it's warm." The young woman watched him carefully as he took several steps backward. "I won't touch you without your permission," Thomas continued, "and I won't do anything you don't want me to do." He had learned these words from his daughter Sarah, who worked with troubled youth in the city. She had taught him that sometimes the most important thing you could give someone was the power to make their own choices, even small ones. "What's your name, miss?" he asked. She was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. Then she whispered, "Emma, Emma," he repeated, and somehow the name seemed to fit her delicate features and the way she held herself with dignity despite her circumstances. "That's a lovely name." He settled himself down on a nearby rock, making sure to stay well out of her personal space. "Emma, I'm going to tell you a little story while you think about whether you want me to help you." She looked surprised but nodded slightly. "When my youngest daughter Rebecca was about your age, she came home one day with a bird she'd found." Thomas's voice took on the gentle cadence of someone who had told many stories over the years. "This little sparrow had a broken wing and was scared out of its mind. Emma's eyes were fixed on his face now. Rebecca wanted to help that bird more than anything in the world, but every time she got close it would flutter and panic and hurt itself worse. He paused and looked out across the pasture where his horses were grazing peacefully. So you know what she did? Emma shook her head slightly. She sat down about 6 feet away from that bird and started reading her homework out loud. A small smile tugged at the corner of Emma's mouth. Every day for a week she would sit in the same spot and read her lessons. Thomas continued. Math problems, history assignments, even her English essays. Now Emma was really listening. The end of the week that little bird was hopping closer and closer to hear her better. He chuckled softly at the memory. Turns out sparrows are curious creatures. Emma's grip on the blanket had loosened slightly, and some of the tension had left her shoulders. One day the bird hopped right up onto her book, Thomas said, and Rebecca was able to see that its wing wasn't broken after all. He looked directly at Emma with kind eyes. It was just tangled up in a piece of thread that had gotten wrapped around it. The young woman was studying his face now as if trying to decide something important. All Rebecca had to do was cut that thread and the bird flew away. Thomas finished. Sometimes what looks like a big problem just needs a gentle touch and the right kind of patience. They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments. The sun was climbing higher now and the morning was growing warmer. Finally, Emma spoke. I ran away from a bad situation, she said simply. Thomas nodded. I figured as much. I've been walking for 3 days. Her voice was stronger now, though still quiet. I saw your horses and thought maybe I could rest here for just a little while. You're welcome to stay as long as you need, Thomas said without hesitation. I have a guest room in the house and my wife Martha makes the best vegetable soup in 3 counties. Emma's eyes filled with tears. I don't have any money to pay you. Thomas waved his hand dismissively. Did I mention payment? He asked. I don't recall saying anything about money. For the first time since he'd found her, Emma smiled. It transformed her entire face. And Thomas could see the strong-spirited young woman she really was beneath the fear and exhaustion. Would you like me to call someone for you? He asked. Family or friends? Emma's smile faded. There's no one to call, she said simply. Thomas felt that familiar tug at his heart. He had always been a sucker for strays, whether they were animals or people. Well then, he said, standing up, slowly. How about we get you up to the house and let Martha take a look at that shoulder? Emma hesitated. I meant what I said about not touching you, Thomas added gently. We can figure out a way to get you there, without me having to do anything. That makes you uncomfortable. Emma looked up at him for a long moment. Then she slowly began to push herself up against the stone wall. Thomas immediately stepped forward but caught himself. May I offer you my arm for balance? He asked. Emma nodded and Thomas extended his elbow. She grasped it lightly and together they began the slow walk toward the ranch house. Thomas matched his pace to hers and didn't comment when she needed to stop several times to rest. The house came into view and Thomas could see Martha working in her garden. She looked up when she saw them approaching and immediately set down her trowel. Martha. Hartwell was a woman who had raised 3 daughters and helped deliver half the babies in the county over the past 4 decades. She took one look at Emma and her face immediately softened with understanding. Thomas, she called out, bring that child up onto the porch where she can sit in the shade. Martha disappeared into the house and returned moments later with a tall glass of sweet iced tea and a plate of her famous oatmeal cookies. Drink this slowly, honey, she said to Emma, and try to eat something even if you don't feel like it. Emma accepted the glass gratefully. Her hands were shaking slightly and Martha noticed Thomas. She said without taking her eyes off Emma, would you go call Doc Peterson and ask him to come by when he has a chance? Thomas nodded and headed inside. Martha settled into the rocking chair beside Emma. I'm Martha, she said simply. And I can see you've had a rough time of it. Emma's eyes filled with tears again. I don't want to be any trouble, honey, Martha said with a gentle laugh. If I were afraid of trouble, I never would have married a rancher and raised 3 daughters. She paused to let Emma take a sip of tea. Besides, there's no such thing as trouble when it comes to helping someone who needs it. Over the next hour, Emma slowly began to relax. Martha had a way of talking that was both comforting and undemanding. She shared stories about the ranch and the animals, about her daughters who now lived in different cities but still came home for holidays, about the changing seasons and the way the light fell differently across the valley at different times of year. When Doc Peterson arrived, he was a kind elderly man who had been taking care of the folks in this area for longer than Emma had been alive. He examined her shoulder gently and pronounced it severely bruised, but not broke.